नमस्कार दोस्तों, गीगाबाइट कंप्यूटर क्लास के इस डाटाबेस मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम में आप सबका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको बतलाएंगे डाटा मॉडलिंग एज पार्ट ऑफ डाटाबेस डिज़ाइन। तो दोस्तों, डाटा मॉडलिंग जो है वो डाटाबेस डिज़ाइन का एक पार्ट है। अब हम The data model is one part of a conceptual design process. The other is the function model. दोस्तों, डाटा मॉडल जो है एक पार्ट है कंसेप्चुअल डिज़ाइन प्रोसेस का और दूसरा है फंक्शन मॉडल। द डाटा मॉडल फोकसेस on what data should be stored in the database. डाटा मॉडल फोकस करता है what data should be stored in the database, while the function models deals with how the data is processed. फंक्शन मॉडल जो है ये बतलाता है डाटा कैसे प्रोसेस होता है, जबकि डाटा मॉडल फोकस करता है what data should be stored in database. डाटाबेस में क्या स्टोर हो रहा है ये डाटा मॉडल फोकस करता है और फंक्शन मॉडल कैसे डाटा प्रोसेस होता है। दोस्तों, यही मेन बेसिक डिफरेंस है। टू पुट, अब इस चीज़ के लिए हम लोगों को जो है इसमें यही मेन डिफरेंस है। यही मेन डिफरेंस है। टू पुट दिस इज इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द रिलेशनल database, the data model is used to design the relational tables. The functional model is used to design the queries that will access and perform operations on those tables. Data modeling is preceded by planning and analysis. The effort devoted to this stage is proportional to the scope of the database. The planning and analysis of a database intended to serve the needs of an enterprise will require more effort than one intended to serve a small work group. The information needed to build a data model is gathered during the requirements analysis. Although not formally considered part of the data model stage by some methodology, in reality, the requirements analysis and the ER diagramming part of the data model are done at the same time. Requirement analysis. The goal of the requirement analysis are: first, to determine the data requirements of the database in terms of primitive object. तो पहला है दोस्तों टू डिटरमाइन द डाटा रिक्वायरमेंट। डाटा रिक्वायरमेंट्स को डिटरमाइन करना ऑफ द डाटाबेस इन टर्म्स ऑफ प्रिमिटिव ऑब्जेक्ट्स। टू classify and describe the information about these objects. Objects के describe, classify and describe the information. Information को classify और describe करना. To identify and classify the relationship among the objects। तीसरा पॉइंट है। नेक्स्ट पॉइंट है to determine the type of transactions that will be executed on the database and the interactions between the data and the transactions। To identify rules governing the integrity of the data। The modeler or modelers works with the end users of an organization to determine the data requirements of the database। Information needed for the requirements analysis can be gathered in several ways। Review of existing document। Such documents include existing form and reports, written guidelines, job descriptions, personal narratives, and memoranda। Papers documents is a good way to become familiar with the organizations or activity you need to model। तो यहाँ तक हम लोग समझ गए हर एक पॉइंट को दोस्तों। हमारा नेक्स्ट है इंटरव्यूज विथ एंड यूजर्स। These can be combinations of individual or group meetings। Try to keep group sessions to under 5 or 6 people। If possible, try to have everyone with the same functions in one meeting। Use a blackboard, flip chart, or overhead transparencies to record information gathered from the interviews। Review of existing automated system। Review of existing automated system। If the organization already has an automated system, review the system design specification and documentation। The requirements analysis is usually done at the same time as the data modeling। Requirements analysis उसी समय होता है जिस समय डाटा मॉडलिंग होता है। दोनों की टाइम सेम होती है। एज इंफॉर्मेशन इज कलेक्टेड, डाटा ऑब्जेक्ट आर आइडेंटिफाइड एंड क्लासिफाइड एज आइदर एंटिटीज, एट्रीब्यूट्स और रिलेशनशिप्स, assigned names and defined using terms familiar to the end users। The objects are then modeled and analyzed using an ER diagram। The diagram can be reviewed by the modelers and the end users to determine its completeness and accuracy। If the model is not correct, it is modified, which sometimes requires additional information to be collected। The review and edit cycle continues until the model is certified as correct। 3 points to keep in mind during the requirements एनालिसिस आर। 3 पॉइंट्स अपने माइंड में रखना है जबकि रिक्वायरमेंट्स एनालिसिस हो रहा है उसमें। फर्स्ट, टॉक to the end users about their data in real world terms. Users do not think in terms of entities, attributes and relationship, but about the actual people, things and activities they deal with daily. तो पहला जो है दोस्तों ये हो गया। दूसरा है, टेक द टाइम टू लर्न द बेसिक about the organization and its activities that you want to model. Having an understanding about the processes will make it easier to build the model. और तीसरा है, end users typically think about and view data in different ways according to their functions within an organization. Therefore, it is important to interview the largest number of people that time permits. A step in building the data model. While ER model lists and defines the construct required to build a data model, there is no standard process for doing so. Some methodologies such as IDFix specify a bottom-up development process where the model is built in stages. Typically, the entities and relationships are modeled first, followed by key attributes, and then the model is finished by adding non-key attributes. Other experts argue that is practice using a phased approach is impractical because it requires too many meetings with the end users. The sequence used for these documents are, तो दोस्तों ये जो है बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है सीक्वेंस। फर्स्ट, आइडेंटिफाई एंड of data objects and relationship. Drafting the initial ER diagram with entities and relationship. Refining the ER diagram. Add key attribute to the diagram. Adding non-key attribute. Diagramming generalization hierarchies. Validating the model through normalization. Adding business and integrity rules to the model. Now these are the eight sequence used for documents are. तो यहाँ तक हम लोग कंप्लीट कर लिए दोस्तों। अब नेक्स्ट है आइडेंटिफाई डाटा ऑब्जेक्ट्स एंड रिलेशनशिप। In order to begin constructing the basic model, the modeler must analyze the information gathered during the requirements analysis for the purpose of classifying data objects as either entities or attributes. Second, identify and defining relationship between entities. Thirdly, naming and defining identified entities, attribute and relationship. And fourth one is documenting this information in the data document. तो यहाँ तक हम लोग समझ गए. While the definitions of the construct in the ER model are simple, the model does not address the fundamental issue of how to identify them. Some commonly given guidelines are: entities contain descriptive information. Attributes either identify or describe entities. Relationship are associations between entities. These guidelines are discussed in more details below. Entities, attributes, validating attributes, derived attributes, and code values. Relationship, naming data object, object definitions, recording information in design documents. Entities. There are various definitions of entities. Any distinguishable person, place, things, event, or concept about which information is kept. A thing which can be distinctly identified. Any distinguishable object that is to be represented in a database. Anything about which we store information like supplier, machine, tools, employee, unity pole, airline seat. For each entity type, certain attributes are stored. These definitions contain common themes about entities. An entity is a thing, concept, or object. However, entities can sometimes represent the relationship between two or more objects. This type of entities is known as an associative entities. Once again, an entity is a things, concepts, or objects. However, entities can sometimes represent the relationship between two or more objects. This type of entity is known as associative entity. Entities are objects which contain descriptive information. If an data object you have identified is described by other objects, then it is an entity. If there is no description information associated with them, with the item, it is not entities. तो यहाँ तक दोस्तों हम लोग समझ गए. Whether or not a data object is an entity may depend upon the organization or active being model. An entity represents many things which share properties. They are not single things. For example, King Lear and Hamlet are both plays which share common attributes such as name, author, and cast of characters. The entity describes these things would be play with King Lear and Hamlet being instances of the entities. Entities which share common properties are candidates for being converted to generalization hierarchy. Entities should not be used to distinguish between time period.